Okay, so today we're going to get into the French Revolution and talk about some of the reasons why we need to study the French Revolution as well as Napoleon. And so I've listed them up here on the screen, and make sure that you copy these down. Understand more than just what I've written here up on the screen, but understand really why. And so your book talks a lot about this in your reading, and so I want you to not rely just upon this video, but also dig into this from what you read in your book. But there are ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity that continue to shape our cultures today. You see that a lot in the United States that carries over from the French Revolution into the United States, but it's not necessarily coming from the French Revolution itself. It's actually coming from all those writers from the Enlightenment that had talked about many of these ideals. And so we see it very evidently in the French Revolution, but we also see it in the American Revolution, but they come out a little bit differently in the way that those are handled, which we're going to get into a little bit later on. It also is important to look at the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen, because they talk a lot about human rights, and that is something that carries on, once again, even to today. Those Declaration of the Rights of Man were kind of like the Bill of Rights that we see in America, but yet it's the French version, so we don't want to draw too many connections to that. But once again, both of these ideals, like we talked about in the Enlightenment, they come out of Enlightenment ideas that then transition into France as well as over into the United States. And then, of course, the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror has become a warning to many of the democratic societies of the dangers of resorting to violence in order to get progress. And I think that's important for us to remember in the United States, and how the United States is not a true democracy. Even though that is something that you will hear a lot of people talk about, especially in the media today. They will talk about America being a democracy. No, we're not really a democracy. We're a democratic republic, or we are a representative republic or representative democracy, and so therefore, yes, we have democratic principles in the United States, but not a true democracy, which one of the important influences that comes out of that is the fact that there is always going to be a minority who does not get their way. And the minority needs to be heard, but yet in a democratic society, they are going to then have to agree or at least comply with the way that the majority rules. And if we're going to have a true democracy, then that is going to be the case all the time. But in a representative government like we have, we elect people in order to allow them to vote on our behalf, and sometimes we're not going to like the way that that goes. And in the Reign of Terror, they had very little representation, and because they had little representation and it was the elite who were making all the decisions, they decided to resort to violence. And we see the outcome of what happens when the minority who doesn't get their way begin to go to violence rather than going through the democratic principles that were key to the beginning of the French government, as well as are key to the beginning of the American government. And so that is something to be careful about and to watch and see how it unfolds here in France, as well as maybe look at a prediction for the future. The French Revolution ideas also spread democracy and nationalism globally. And so many other parts of the world are going to adapt both democracy and nationalism within their governments. Again, it's not, for most of these, it's not a true democracy, but it's democratic principles. And then the idea of nationalism, which puts the country ahead of the individual goals, and the idea that we're going to promote the country above all else. We'll get more into that in a future unit. The Napoleonic Code provided a lot of information to help European and Latin American legal systems, and many of those are still in place today, and therefore has become something that has withstood the test of time over several generations, that the laws that Napoleon created for his reign in France were very substantial, and they were something that was able to be carried on from one generation to the next. And then the sale of Louisiana. That was a very good deal for America. That comes here in this time where Napoleon needs the money to continue his conquest throughout Europe. He does not really want to give up Louisiana Purchase, but it was a very good deal for America, and bottom line, he needed the money. That was supposed to be his way of getting into North America. Once he had conquered Europe, he was then going to focus his attention on North America, and he already had Louisiana Territory in his control. He was going to use the Mississippi River to then begin squeezing out the Americans and hopefully take over in most of North America. thank goodness that did not work. We also have this important principle of constitutionalism, which says that the government is limited by laws, and so rulers have to obey those laws. And that's the way that the United States government is intended to operate. It's also the way the French government was intended to operate after. And so that's an important one here to keep in mind. Give me a moment. Just disconnected from my, there we go, we're all back on. So constitutionalism is the idea that the rulers have to obey the laws that are agreed upon by the people and the government. We saw this back in the Glorious Revolution in England, where you had the condition by which William and Mary came into power was the fact that they had to sign off on this document which gave the people more power. And they also said that they were going to rule by the same laws that they were expecting the people to live under. That's what created the constitutional monarchy. In the American Revolution, of course, we know that in the United States we live under a constitution. That began in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. Now, they're very separate documents, so don't think they're the same thing. But the Declaration of Independence happened in 1776, that over the course of the war, we go through the Articles of Confederation, we eventually get to the Constitution in 1789, which then says that all of our government leaders are going to follow and obey the same rules that they insist on everybody else following. And within each one of these, we see ideas of equality, liberty, and fraternity, or sometimes we might use the term democracy in here in order to help explain the fact that everybody has in the best interest promotion of the country as well as each other. And so when we move on here into France, looking at the French Revolution, there are a number of ingredients that put together the perfect storm for the people to revolt against the French government. First of all, there was financial crisis. There was also an unfit king who was ruling. There's the Estates General and the National Assembly. We're going to break down each and every one of those here shortly.